This video is sponsored by Buildieio.
Oh hey, see, back in the day, I didn't have solar lanterns, so I lit my porch with fireflies and hope. But now I harness the power of a star 93 million miles away because I'm tired of chasing fireflies in my backyard. This here is a solar outdoor lantern. There's free plans in the description below. I built this lantern with about $35 worth of materials. It's perfect to sell, make a profit, or just adds a great addition to your front porch. So now, let's go ahead and start building this thing.
So for this build, I am using a 1x12 piece of cedar. This is left over from another project, actually the swing bench that I made in a previous video. The widest part of the lantern is going to be 8.5 inches, so if you get a 1x10 cedar board, you'll be just fine. I wanted to mill mine down to 5/8 of an inch, but you definitely don't have to do this. After I got it through the planer, I took it over to my miter saw, where I started to make my initial cuts. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm building, I don't like making all of the cuts at the beginning and then piecing it all together. I like to cut a lot of the pieces as I go so that if I make mistakes or if I just want to change something up, I can adjust the measurements and make different cuts. So I start here by cutting the bottom plate, the lid cap, and then the plank I'm going to rip down for the pillars of the lantern. Now I'm going to head over to the table saw, get it set up to cut these boards correctly. Set the fence right at 8.5 inches, and we're going to finish cutting the bottom plate, the lid, and the lid cap. I'm going to cut the lid cap right at 7 inches. The lid cap is basically just a piece I'm going to put on top just to make it look a little bit more decorative. And then after that's cut, I'm going to adjust the fence to 1.25 inches and rip 4 pieces at this size for the pillars of the lantern. Once I get the pillars cut, I know I want to space them out exactly at 7 inches to the widest point. And since I know that cap decorative piece is a 7-inch square, I'm gonna line the pillars up on that and then take a measurement from the inside to inside of those pieces so I have the measurements for the window frames. I'm gonna need 4 short window frame pieces at 4.5 inches and 4 window frame pieces at 5.5 inches. Once I get all those cut up, it was time to start cutting the pieces for the window grids. I love using SketchUp, especially on my phone in the shop. This is completely not sponsored. I just want to share something that has really helped my building with you guys. I design all of my projects in SketchUp before I start building. This saves a ton of time and a lot of wood and money because I'm not making mistakes on cuts, or not making as many mistakes on cuts, I should say. I can design everything in real life measurements, make sure it all fits together. And then as I'm building, basically just use the tape measure tool inside of SketchUp and know exactly how long I need to cut all of my pieces. And just to make it a little more decorative, I decided to trim the window grid pieces from 5/8 of an inch down to 1/2 inch thick. Okay, so this may look like a lot of random pieces, but there is a method to this madness. So right here we have the base plate and the top plate, and this will be the top decorative piece. It sits on top. I don't know what they're called. What would you call these? The pillars? We'll call these the pillars. We have our trim pieces for the bottom on the short sides. We have the trim pieces for the long side. Then we have all these window pieces together, and they're gonna go just like that. Wanted to do half laps. We're basically gonna cut 1/4 inch here and here, 1/4 inch on this piece and this piece, and they should fit just like that. So I'm gonna pull out my little crosscut sled, use a table saw here, and get all these half laps cut, put them together, and then we'll start tacking everything in. So now it was time to make all the marks for the half laps I was gonna cut with the table saw. I just took my mini combo square here. I have all the exact measurements in the plans in the description below, so you can check those out if you're building this along with the video. But I did my best to line them all up, mark them uniformly so that everything was square, and it was going to look very symmetrical when it was inside of the lantern. Because if you're going to build something, you might as well build it pretty. And once I got everything marked up and I was happy with all of the measurements, I took it over to the table saw, made sure the table saw blade was sticking up 1/4 inch above the crosscut sled that I was using, and then proceeded to make all of these tedious little cuts back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. I did use some blue tape in a few of these shots just to help with some of the tear out on the back, but I realized that most of this was going to be covered up since it was a half lap joint, so to speed up the process I skipped the tape and just moved on. Got a little too close to the blade for comfort on the short crossed grid pieces, so I used a clamp to make the initial cuts, then just use a chisel to knock out the rest. After that, I did a quick dry fit to make sure everything was fitting correctly before getting out the Titebond 3 wood glue and starting to glue them all together. After getting them all glued together and making sure there was no glue on the outside, I just stacked them all together and used a couple quick clamps to hold them overnight, let them dry, and then in the morning, come back, take them out, and they should be good to go. And guess what? They were good to go. So this is pretty special here. You guys are watching me for the first time ever use a Festool sander. I, like a lot of people, probably went through the same phases of I don't need a Festool. I can get by with my cheap little palm sander. My goodness, this thing was worth every penny. I got a great deal on it. It was on Facebook Marketplace. It was only used once, so went ahead and snatched it up.
Man, dude, why are you still trying to sell stuff through Facebook comments and text messages? Well, because building a website sounds like a nightmare, and I'm terrible with technology. That's why you need Buildieio. It's built for woodworkers just like us. You get a clean, professional website. You can sell your builds on it, collect emails, all of it. Yeah, but I'm gonna need help with like everything else because I don't have a creative bone in my body. That's the best part. We throw in coaching and design help too. You just focus on building cool stuff and we'll help you actually sell it. Okay, well, this is way better than my system, which is no system at all. Exactly. So go to Buildieio before your next business plan is scribbled on that scrap piece of plywood over there, all right? I'll see you there.
Just went over everything with 120 grit sandpaper, smoothed everything out. It's gonna be a lot easier to do this before I assembled everything with the glue and nails. And speaking of glue and nails, I'm using a variety of 1, 1 1/4, and 2-inch brad nails, 18 gauge brad nails, I should say. That along with Titebond 3 wood glue to assemble this whole thing. I did mess up when I was cutting the long vertical grid pieces for the windows, so I had to go back and trim those up. Don't worry, I corrected those in the plans. And then depending on how far I needed the nail to go through the wood, I just picked the appropriate length nail for whatever I was nailing in. So everything's pretty self-explanatory here, just using those window trim pieces for the top and bottom on the appropriate sides as I'm showing here, and then just tacking the window grids inside of those. Again, using the appropriate size window grids for the right side of the lantern. Once I got the two sides with the 5.5 inch grids and window trim pieces, I flipped them over and then tacked in the 4.5 grid pieces and window trim. Using the assistance of a little clamp here to hold in the grid as I was using the brad nailer to tack them in. After that, I took the base plate for the lantern, marked in 3/4 of an inch on all sides. That way I had something to reference when I was centering the lantern cage here. Flipped it over on the bottom, then used some 1-inch nails to tack it in place with some wood glue. And look at that, it's starting to finally look like a lantern. So for the solar lights, I'm using these. I'll put a link in the description of the exact model I used. They were pretty cheap. It was, I think, $8 or $9 for 2 of these lights. I seem to have pretty good reviews on them, and I measured the exact diameter of these lights before I started drilling the holes in the top plate and the decorative plate. But then, looking around the shop, I realized that I had some camo duct tape laying around, and the inside looked like it was the same diameter as the light. So I did what any good woodworker would do, and put the light inside the duct tape, and it was actually perfect. So I used the inside of the duct tape roll to mark on the top plate and the decorative plate what I needed to cut out. To cut this out, I just used a drill bit big enough where I could fit my jigsaw blade in. Then just use my jigsaw to cut a circle on both plates. Kind of had to keep trimming it up until I got the light to fit in. I didn't want the light to be loose at all, so I took my time here. And after that, I just took my trim router with a 1/8 inch roundover bit and went around all the edges on the bottom plate, the top plate, and that decorative plate. Now I took some glue, some 1-inch brad nails, tacked the decorative piece on top of the lantern lid, making sure it was nice and center. I did drive the nails up through the bottom so that you couldn't see the nail holes from the top. And then with the assistance of my beautiful daughter, we took some wood filler and just filled all the holes in around the lantern. And while I was waiting for that to dry, I just took some 120 grit sandpaper and just softened up the edges on the inner grids and anywhere else that was a little rough still. So for this next step, I'm using some frosted plexiglass I bought from Home Depot down the street. I measured the inside of the lantern to make sure I was getting the exact width that I needed. I also switched out the saw blade on my table saw to a 60 tooth blade. When cutting plexiglass, you want a higher tooth count and a finer cutting blade if possible. Just gonna borrow these from Manny for a quick second. Oh, sorry there, bud. After that, I proceeded to make sure all of the glass was fitting inside of the lantern properly. To get the glass cut to the correct height, I took it over and just cut it on my miter saw. I already had a higher tooth blade installed, so luckily that sped up this process. Had to make a few minor adjustments. I took my time because I didn't want there to be any gaps. And once I knew all the plexiglass was fitting right, I pulled out the sander again and just used 120 grit sandpaper over the whole thing again, smoothing out all of those spots that we covered with wood filler to fill those nail holes. And I was informed by my wife passing by that she was hoping that I would paint the cage of the lantern a black color, leaving the bottom and top plate the wood. So I thought this was a great idea, so I said yes, of course, and grabbed some of this bare wood deck stain that I had laying around the shop from a previous build. I always love using leftover materials for current builds. It makes me so happy. And then again, with the help of my beautiful daughter, we painted the cage of the lantern this nice, beautiful black color, peeled off the tape, and it was looking pretty crispy, if I do say so myself. So to add a little richer color and to give it a little more protection, all of the bare cedar wood, I just took a rag with some teak oil and rubbed everything down. I then took some denatured alcohol, cleaned out the inside of the lantern that all of the plexiglass was going to adhere to, then took just some clear silicone glass sealant. It said it was able to stick to pretty much any surface, including wood and plexiglass. And you guessed it, just ran some beads of silicone down all the places the plexiglass was going to make contact with, put the correct glass pieces in, and voila, that's French, for we did it. But hold up, we're not done quite yet. This thing needed some legs. So just drawing a little design here, about 2 inches on top, 1 inch on bottom. Cut a strip out of the remaining wood I had laying around. Cut 4 of these little shapes out. Used some glue, a couple 1 1/4 inch brad nails per leg, and tacked them on. I also used 120 grit sandpaper to smooth them out and coated the whole bottom with teak oil for some added protection. I almost forgot, but I added a couple, by couple I mean 4 drainage holes in the bottom just in case any moisture or water gets in. It has somewhere to go and let this thing breathe a little bit. After that, using some glue, I made sure that the lid pieces were centered with the lantern, and then using some 2-inch brad nails carefully centered them over the edges of the cage and drove in a few on top. After that, I went to put the light in, but the lid was still a little bit out of line and not big enough, not as big as the hole on the decorative plate. So I had to take a flush trim bit on my trim router, just went around the inside real quick, not too big of a deal. And then trying again, I got that light to slide in just right.
Well, thanks guys for watching. I'll be sure to put a link to everything I built this lantern with in the description below. Check out Buildieio, check out the Guardians Guild, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss other free plans that I put out on this channel. So until next time guys, go build something cool. This thing's not even lit.